Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here this afternoon as we give a update to our latest officer-involved shooting, which occurred February 1st. You know, we're going to be talking about this case, and as they walk through the case, you're going to see that I want to commend our officers for a lot of great work they did that's not related directly to the actual officer-involved shooting. Our officers were out; they were dispatched to a stolen car. They made some good decisions not to pursue a stolen car and endanger the public. I want to thank everybody who's helped support funding in the past. You know, we had a helicopter up. The helicopter is able to track the motor vehicle throughout the city, and we were able to bring it to a resting point. And I also want to point that, I'm very grateful as a chief that I'm not standing up here talking about any injured officers. As you go through this, you're going to see how close we came to actually the potential for an officer being seriously injured was there at several points during this incident. And we're going to talk about, something we've talked about in depth over and over again. This is going to center around a stolen motor vehicle. This is going to center around an individual that we have a strong suspicion was under the influence of meth. And later on, toxicology reports will come out and they will indicate whether this person was under the influence or not. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Deputy Commander Hartsock, and then we'll take questions at the end. But once again, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Chief. We're here to talk about an officer-involved shooting occurred on February 1st, 2022 at 2700 4th Street Northwest. This critical incident community briefing will provide you with information of an attempt to arrest a person who had fled from police in a stolen vehicle and on foot, then armed himself during the attempt to physically arrest him, and an officer-involved shooting occurred. You're about to see relevant video footage and learn about other evidence and police procedures related to the case so that you can have a better understanding of what occurred based on what we know right now. The Albuquerque Police Department conducts very thorough criminal and use of force investigations, which typically require investigators to interview multiple witnesses, review hours of video footage, and analyze a significant amount of forensic evidence. We're still at the early stages of this investigation, which can often take several months to complete. Our understanding of the incident may change as this additional evidence is collected, analyzed, and reviewed. We also do not draw any conclusions about whether the officers acted consistent with our policies and the law until all the facts are known and the investigation is complete. The images, audio, and video you're about to see may be disturbing. When police officers use force to arrest a subject or defend against an attack, it can be graphic and difficult to watch. In addition, there may be strong language used by those shown in the video. The officers who fired that gun that day were Officer Charles Miller and Officer Ramiro Garza. Officer Miller got hired by the Albuquerque Police Department in 2008. His current assignment is the traffic unit. He has no prior officer-involved shootings, and he has returned to duty. Officer Ramiro Garza has also been with the department since 2008, was currently assigned to the Valley Area Command, where he is now back on duty, and has no prior officer-involved shootings. This incident initiated in the Northeast Area Command. It would end in the Valley Area Command. On February 1st, 2022, officers in that Northeast Area Command were dispatched to the area of 4500 Carlisle Boulevard Northeast to locate an occupied stolen vehicle at that the victim's neighbor had spotted. Here is the first part of the 911 call that initiated this police contact.
911 emergency.
Hi, I'm wondering how to get a hold of the police.
This is the police. So do you have an emergency?
Yes.
What's your emergency?
My neighbor's truck was stolen, and I have contacted my neighbor, and his truck is sitting right in front of me, and there's a dude sitting in the truck.
Do we know, did he do a report, or we're not sure?
I'm not sure, but I know it's his truck 100%.
Okay, so where are you at with the vehicle?
So Montgomery and Carlisle, I'm sitting at the Maverick, and across the street from the truck,
What business is that other person in front of?
Huh?
So you're at the Maverick, what is that other person at? What business?
in the apartment complex in the parking lot, and he is passed out from the driver's seat of the vehicle.
Okay. And so do you see the names of the apartments?
Casa Benito Apartments.
That's a funny thing. Okay. What kind of vehicle is it?
It's a Duramax with a camper on the top of it.
What color Duramax?
It's white.
The officers grouped up and were making a plan to safely approach the vehicle while it was at the apartment complex. Our helicopter Air 1 that day was overhead and responded to assist the officers by watching the vehicle from above. As officers were going to approach the stolen car, it started to move out of the apartment and got onto Montgomery and then onto the on-ramp to I-25 and went northbound. The helicopter maintained visual sight of the stolen car, and the officers followed without emergency lights engaged to safely let the car stop and then attempt to take the person into custody. The vehicle drove around northern Albuquerque and then approached 4th Street and Manal northwest. Our air support unit observed the stolen vehicle drive the wrong way in traffic and then turn onto Woodland Drive just east of 4th Street. A male exited the driver's door and ran into the Court John Motel. Uniformed and marked unit officers then drove into the parking lot as the male tried to get onto a motorcycle and started. A foot chase started, and as the male was attempted to be physically controlled, he pulled a firearm out of his pocket and an officer-involved shooting occurred. The person that was shot by police that day was 31-year-old Devin Morris, who appears to be a lifelong resident of Albuquerque. Here's the air support video of the stolen white truck being parked at the hotel by Mr. Morris, part of the foot chase and part of the shooting. There was no audio recorded as part of this video, so it's going to be silent as it plays. Officer Miller was wearing his lapel camera and did fire his weapon that day. Here is his lapel video. Keep in mind, on some of these videos we play, the first 30 seconds sometimes does not have audio, as when they're activated it goes back in time 30 seconds to capture that video. So the audio might jump in.
fire, Sergeant Supervisor, assistant, fire.
Officer Garza was wearing his lapel camera and is the officer who attempted to physically detain Mr. Morris. Here is his video. Officer Garza did fire his weapon at Mr. Morris that day.
Stop right there, stop, police! Police department, he's dead, stop!
Officer Gomez was a supporting officer to Officer Garza's physical arrest, and he deployed his taser that day. He did not fire his weapon. Here is his lapel video.
Stop, on the floor! You'll be tased! Albuquerque Police, stop! You will be tased! You will be tased! Get on the ground, get on the ground! Get on the ground! Got a gun, got a gun! Got a gun, drop the gun! Drop the gun! Hey, let me, get it back over here, bro. It's your hands, hands, put your hands!
That last video gave us our best perspective of the shooting, so we slowed it down just to show you the parts right before it occurred, and then we'll go through some still shots. So here's that same video, but slowed down at the point of the fight. Here's some stills taken from that last video. After Mr. Morris ran from officers who ignored their commands to surrender, he rams into a motel door, which does not open. Officer Garza is able to close distance on Mr. Morris at this point. Mr. Morris can be seen reaching down into his pants as Officer Garza gets within feet of catching him. Officer Garza grabs Mr. Morris from behind as Officer Gomez deploys his taser on Mr. Morris. A firearm in the right hand of Mr. Morris becomes instantly recognizable to both officers, and Mr. Morris continues to resist and ignore commands to surrender. Officer Garza tries to secure the arm of Mr. Morris as he holds the firearm. Mr. Morris breaks his arm away from Officer Garza, and Officer Garza then draws his weapon. Mr. Morris continues to hold the firearm in a shooting grip and even postures his body and gun away from Officer Garza, ignoring the officer's commands to surrender, and begins to run away, still armed. Mr. Morris runs towards a highly busy 4th Street and directly at a male who was standing outside the front of the motel, which you can see circled on the far left of this image, while still holding the firearm. At this point, the officers fire their weapons. This photo shows the taser darts did successfully attach to Mr. Morris, yet were ineffective. This is the firearm that was recovered from the person of Mr. Morris on the ground. And this holster was recovered from Mr. Morris as well. Narcotics, including possible fentanyl, were recovered from Mr. Morris's person. Again, the person shot by police that day was 31-year-old Devin Morris. He did succumb to his injuries that day. Over the next several months, the Albuquerque Police Department will continue to investigate and analyze this incident. We will continue interviewing any new witnesses that come forward and complete any forensic tests. After the investigation is complete, our Force Review Board will forward the findings to the Superintendent of Police Reform to determine if this incident met the high standards of the Albuquerque Police Department. The MATF will forward their case to the District Attorney's Office, who will make any determination of criminal charges. At that, I'll stand for any questions you have.
How many officers responded initially to at the Montgomery Carlisle scene? Was it just those three?
It was just those three and maybe one or two more.
Okay.
The Montgomery one?
To the Montgomery one.
The Northeast?
The Northeast call, yeah, 4 officers total.
Was the gun, where did the gun come from? Is it legally owned by him?
Still under investigation. KOP, did you have
I
one?
was gonna ask something about the firearm. I don't know if you've been able to speak on it since it's still under investigation, but is it known at this time that this gun was used in any other kind of crimes? Considers that still under investigation?
Preliminarily, we don't believe it is, but some of that analysis still takes a little bit of time.
You mentioned that the officers recognized him while they were wrestling with him. I'm guessing he has a long criminal history.
Not recognized him, recognized the firearm in his hand. I apologize if that was mischaracterized. Yes?
The deceased suspect that he had with a criminal history.
Yes, he had a warrant out for his arrest that day, a felony warrant for his arrest. So he was local to the system, was wanted by a judge on a different felony case, and would have been booked that day on being in possession of the firearm illegally as a felon, as well as a stolen vehicle and resisting arrest, potentially aggravated assault. Yes.
I was looking at his criminal history and kind of going through it, and there are like previous stolen vehicle charges, but those cases were then dropped because the investigation was incomplete or they blew past the deadlines. Is that something, Chief, you want to address at all about how these cases can be stopped earlier on with better investigations?
You know, I think there's a variety of reasons, and we'd have to look into the specifics of the case. Do you happen to know the year of those first cases?
The most recent one was 2020. It was in September. He was arrested for unlawful taking of a motor vehicle, and then in late October, it was dismissed for insufficient evidence because there was insufficient evidence to establish that he knew that the car was stolen.
You know, those are some of the things that we struggle with, not as an agency, but our criminal justice system. A lot of times, and as you all know, that I spend a lot of times in auto theft as a lieutenant reviewing a lot of cases. And a lot of times you have an individual who has a stolen car, and prosecution and the courts want us to be able to establish that individual had known that the car was stolen. And short of a person saying, hey, the car was stolen, it's a lot of times hard for us to prove it's stolen, especially when they use some kind of mechanism to start it that could appear as it's a key. So it's very difficult for us to prosecute those cases sometimes. And as you know, during the past, when we came back in 2017, there were several cases that were incomplete and dismissed. And that's why we started the SHIELD unit to help us put together discovery packets and get more evidence and more complete cases over to the DA's office. As we know, the LFC report themselves, themselves noted that that had doubled our indictment rate at the time. So there could be a variety of reasons why auto theft cases are dismissed. You know, another thing that sometimes, you know, that is very challenging for us is fingerprints. We could literally find somebody's fingerprints all over the outside of a car, but unless we find it inside the car, they won't accept the case. So it has to do with the challenges of being able to establish that the person knew the motor vehicle was stolen, and sometimes those cases get dismissed because we just can't get that evidence. And it's not the fault of the officers, it's not the fault of the DA's office, it's just the burden that we have to establish in order to prove that they reasonably should have known the vehicle was stolen.
I don't know if it's released at this point. We'd have to follow up on that.
Fresno Dave.
Can you tell us how many shots were fired from the officers from that day?
We don't know, I don't think do we have an exact number? Do we have a shot spotter activation on this?
We did have a shot spotter activation on this. Do we know how many shots were fired right now? At least 4.
At least 4 shots.
4 shots.
And just to be clear, did the suspect fire their firearm at all?
I think that's something that we're still investigating.
And then also with that, there was a person who was kind of behind the suspect. How close were they to possibly get hit from the gunfire?
I can tell you that the briefing I heard, there was an impact very close to that individual, so. Yeah, that person was put in danger by the actions of this individual.
And also, can you explain why, and correct me if I'm wrong, when police were following the suspect, there was no lights on, like it wasn't like a high-speed, police pursuit. It was kind of, I don't know if you'd say, I don't want to say undercover, but there's no lights going on when they were going after the suspect originally. Is that correct?
Yes, they were trying to get into position to see if they could stop the car safely. As we know, stolen motor vehicle doesn't meet our pursuit policy. So we wouldn't pursue a stolen motor vehicle in of itself by alone being the only charge. And there's a variety of reasons. Across the country, we've seen high-speed pursuits result in citizen deaths. So we try to prevent that, and that's why it's important that we have the resources such as air support to follow these vehicles and see if we can't get them in a situation where it makes more sense for us and is less danger to the public. In this case, it worked out, to the point that this individual parked the vehicle and fled on foot, which is always our hope.
How close was the impact to the other person?
I don't have the exact details, Kyle. They showed me a picture of.
Yeah, it did. One of the rounds did strike the part of the building behind them, but that individual we weren't able to actually contact that day, so it's unsure exactly how close they were. But in the video, you can see he's standing at the open door. As the video continues, after the shots were fired, he ducks inside.
So that person has not been interviewed?
At least as of now, no.
Getting off easy today.
Just for clarification, were the officers that responded or involved in the OIS, they were not any of the original officers who responded? Is that correct?
The original officers who responded were Northeast Area Command officers, and they weren't the officers that were there on scene. The only one that could possibly have been at both scenes is the traffic officer, because they have citywide abilities. But as far as every indication I have is that Northeast Area Command officers responded to the original scene of the stolen motor vehicle. They weren't able to get the vehicle to stop. It was turned over to air support. And one of the things that we looked at was there were no vehicles in pursuit of the vehicle, because we're concerned about that to make sure officers aren't chasing it. And it appeared that the vehicles that did get to the scene were coming actually from the opposite direction than what the path of the vehicle was that day.
When the taser was deployed, can you tell us how many of the prongs hit the suspect? Was it just that one photo that you showed?
I mean, there was at least one that was still attached at the end of the day. It's hard to tell in the middle of it if both were successfully on there or if they had the proper contact. But by his actions, it appeared it was ineffective at least. Yeah.
The chief just talking about that, trying to deploy a taser and it just appears to be ineffective. And then, shots were fired. Just kind of get your, reaction to that.
Less lethal is never foolproof. It's just something that officers know that they just can't rely on solely, and that's why we generally start a force array where we have a less lethal option and a lethal option also there. And winter is just a crucial, very difficult time for us to deploy tasers. I mean, if you ever looked at a taser prong, it ain't that long. They're not traveling at such a speed that they're going to penetrate an outer jacket, clothing underneath, and people were wearing layers of clothing. And actually, during our training on the use of taser, that's one of the things that they tell you always have to take into consideration is the number of garments that somebody's wearing and the ability of the taser to successfully contact the skin.
Chief, if it's all right to ask,
Go ahead.
is that here's another, officer-involved shooting. Of course, we were covering that shooting with the Mexico State Police, and it was a big topic at the legislature, that closed here today. So we can just ask, what is kind of like, the morale with, all these officer-involved shootings and everything like that, just from your perspective?
It's disheartening that we've had so many officer-involved shootings because you have to remember at the end of the day, we always focus on there's an officer-involved shooting, and unless somebody is actually, an officer is actually injured, it's just another officer-involved shooting. But I think we need to keep in perspective that all these officers, for the most part, their lives are in danger. And it goes to show how dangerous this job is and the dedication of our officers. They know the scrutiny they're under. They know the microscope that they'll be viewed upon. And they still go out there every day to try to enforce the law and to help people. Like I said, we will review this. We'll make sure everything was done correctly, and eventually at some point in time we'll come out and, there'll be the two investigations. Was this criminally correct, and was this administratively followed policies? And I credit our officers across the state for out there every day doing their job and putting themselves in jeopardy. This isn't the first motor vehicle officer involved shooting we've had. Like, as Kyle was talking, it's like a repeat of officer-involved shootings and stolen motor vehicles. It seems like just yesterday we were here watching a bait car video with somebody who'd stolen our bait car and was firing out the back window at our officers. Once again, what is it? A stolen motor vehicle, which is a property crime, and an individual who chose to arm themselves. To avoid apprehension, they were willing to try to kill a cop. So think of the citizen who may try to go get their own vehicle back, and how that citizen ain't going to have the training or the ability to take this person into custody safely and could end up getting injured or killed. And we go back to the shooting late last year off of Wyoming and Manal. Same thing. Subject exits a stolen motor vehicle. Officers go contact them. Foot chase ensues, and the subject chooses to arm themselves. It's not like these individuals were armed when officers came up on them. They're purposely reaching into clothing and producing firearms. So like I said, I give our officers credit. I'm thankful for their bravery each and every day across the state, but we have to work better as a state with all the partners to make sure that we start addressing crime. And there are a lot of different ways that crime could be addressed, but I go back to what I've always said. There has to be that line in the sand where an individual who chooses to arm themselves is choosing to arm themselves for a reason, and that reason could be deadly to whether it's an officer or a citizen, and we have to take gun crime serious. I applaud the FBI yesterday and the U.S. Attorney's Office for coming out, and when we could move these cases to the federal system, we will move them to the federal system to ensure that people are held accountable and that we're able to keep the citizens of this city and the state of New Mexico safe.
The video is telling when you see the gun in his right hand, but I think the day of the shooting, a lot of people had questions regarding the fact that he was shot in the back multiple times. What is your response to that? Because people are still going to wonder, even though you can see the gun, he was running in the opposite direction.
I'm so glad you asked that question. We debated whether I was going to address that or not. And I think it's important that's why we hold judgment, that the public sometimes sits back and waits for us to present the facts, and that we're careful. That day when I was on scene, there was already the rumbling that there was a witness going around saying, hey, I have video, I caught this, the officers only shot him in the back. And I think it's important that we're fair to our officers, that we're fair to the community, and we kind of sometimes take a step back and we let investigations play out. Because without a doubt, there is a truth in that. An individual was shot in the back, but the truth is that individual was armed with a firearm, was fleeing officers, and endangered not only officers but the community. So in a way, it is truthful what individuals are saying, but it's the facts of the case that change the whole dynamic. And I think that this one just really emphasizes the points that somebody's perspective at the moment could be one thing, but the entire evidence and all the video is going to show that it's a different thing. And I think it's important that we right now understand and we recognize the importance of body cameras. We've been a big supporter at APD. We were one of the first major agencies to support body cameras. But think how this could have been portrayed so much differently if we didn't have body camera with what witnesses were saying on scene that day. So, I'm thankful that as a state, we've mandated body cams. We will continue to support body cams and ensure our officers are using them, because when it comes down to it, body cameras have helped our officers more than it has hurt them. And the officers that have hurt, well, they shouldn't have been involved in misconduct many of the times. So I'm glad we have body cameras and that we're able to be fully transparent and show this incident in its entirety to the community.
And you guys mentioned that you had not questioned or interviewed the
So that's part of why it's still an open investigation, and why we also even put out to you guys, and you're free to share it. We want to interview anyone that has information on this, so they can contact the police department. We'll happily take their statements and make it part of the investigation.
Was he staying at that hotel, or why did he go to that hotel?
We're still trying to determine why there, but at one point, again, as the video shows, he shoulder rams himself into one of the doors right before the officer grabs a hold of him. We're not sure if it's because he's familiar with it, although it didn't seem like he had easy access to it, which again can raise the threat level of what is this individual doing, right? It's not the way to open a door.
But we don't know if he was staying there?
We're still trying to determine that. It's somewhat of a transient motel, so, it's part of the investigation. It's hard to say.
And was that his motorcycle that he was approaching?
We're still researching exactly the history of the motorcycle. It was somewhat disassembled.
Somewhat disassembled, like you couldn't ride away on it?
I don't know about that, but it wasn't, it registered in a way that makes it just easy to track exactly where it came from. But we hope to get answers to that by the conclusion of the investigation.
I think it's important to note, though, he went somewhere, he parked, he purposely fled on foot, and it's apparent that he was trying to get to that motorcycle. So I think that's something that you could take into consideration is he did have a plan. And we see that many times with these property crimes or vehicle offenders where they stage something somewhere where they know they could get out on foot to get on the alternative means of transportation and flee on something separately that wasn't being looked for in the first place.
You addressed this in my last question, but is it fair to say that you seeing that video, this man you feel was a threat to officers and potentially?
Looking at the video, it's apparent that the individual does have a firearm. There's an individual downrange. Of course, we need to look at this, from top to bottom. Did we respond correctly? Did officers follow their training? Were all the policies and procedures followed? And then we'll be able to come up with a determination administratively if officers did everything correct. Did they de-escalate the situation if it was appropriate? Were they able to use less lethal means? All those questions and answers will come through the administrative investigation. And of course, there's a criminal investigation they'll come out and say. But I think the public themselves should be able to look at this video, and everybody could determine that, there were bystanders there. There was a firearm, and come up with their own conclusions.
Just say one final thing.
Yes.
Just one final thing, building upon what was known at the time and right after the incident. There was an individual there portraying themselves as being a witness and having video, and I know some of the reporters there asked us at the time about that. I just want to caution you all that while it's fresh and people may claim to have seen something, and we still don't know if this person really actually saw something. They claim they didn't see a gun, and we do see a gun. So, when we're initially briefing about it and giving you the information we can, it's just important to keep that perspective. As someone may say they're a witness or believe they're a witness or saw something, but we need to kind of step back and take the larger context of what happened. If there's nothing else. Appreciate you coming.